When I was 3 years old, I had to get my tonsils shrunk. I don't remember much from then, but I do remember one thing. I was laying in bed at the hospital recovering, getting bored, so I asked my parents if I could get up and walk around. They held me out of the bed and I walk out of my room and I see my younger sister outside in a little common area playing Super Mario 64 on the TV. I sat down next to her and watched her play, already blazing through each level. She was only 2 years old and hadn't even learned how to talk yet, but she had learned how to play a video game.
I'm going to lay a take on you. Video games are masterclasses of pedagogical technique, and I mean that outside of games just being fun or engaging on the surface level. Games often have systems of rules, actions, and objectives that a player is required to learn in order to play the game. And these systems can get so complicated and multifaceted that you need some kind of degree to play them. As such, video games need to be able to teach themselves to a player. After all, a video game that can't teach itself probably won't get played, and a video game that won't get played probably won't make money, and a video game that won't make money probably isn't the kind that a company wants to make. We have been through that before. So for once, completely on accident, the goal of generating profit has done something great. There are lots of ways video games teach themselves. Some are more upfront about the learning part and others are much more subtle and naturalistic. For now, I want to focus on the ways video game pedagogy parallels actual teaching theories and what we can stand to learn from the medium, as well as the ways that social spaces surrounding video games can be learning spaces themselves, alongside some of the limitations inherent to this kind of teaching style. So, let's get started.
It's really important for me to start off by saying that I am not talking about edutainment. What's edutainment? Edutainment is educational entertainment, or education through entertaining media, and it's a term that dates as far back as 1954, with some sources attributing its first usage to Walt Disney, describing the True Life Adventures documentary film series. Though, obviously, the concept had existed for centuries prior, with even Moravian philosopher John Amos Comenius proposing a quote-unquote school-as-play type of teaching. In this context, edutainment is meant to mean video games that try to teach the player stuff they would learn in school, like Math Blaster or Jumpstart. These kinds of games saw a real boom in the 90s and early 2000s as computer systems became more commonplace in households. The problem with these kinds of games is, well, they weren't good games or good teaching. In a paper titled Third Generation Educational Use of Computer Games from 2007 by Simon Agenfeldt-Nielsen, he discusses the legacy of edutainment video games while referencing another paper by B. Leyland from 1996. Quote, "To this point, computer games with educational features have not fared well in the marketplace. The educational content tends to come at the expense of the gameplay, and control is taken out of the hands of the player. Game buyers, as opposed to concerned parents, are wary of edutainment." Unquote. Agenfeldt-Nielsen also explains other aspects that made the traditional edutainment model not work well as games nor education, citing a lack of intrinsic motivation, dominance of the educational experience over the gameplay experience, and a generally poor design philosophy. On the flip side, commercial video games meant purely for entertainment had already had a few decades of trial and error on their side to help them hone their teaching strategies. In Chapter 7 of the book, Games, Purpose and Potential in Education, Katrine Becker of the University of Calgary examines the ways some quote-unquote good games mirror legitimate pedagogical strategies and theories. She examines and compares 3 games in this chapter, but one of note is the game Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney and how it emulates both Gagne's 9 events of instruction and problem-based learning, 2 effective theory-based approaches to instruction. Gagne's 9 events are as follows: gaining attention, informing learners of objective, stimulating recall of prior learning, presenting the stimulus, providing learning guidance, eliciting performance, providing feedback, assessing performance, and enhancing retention. Becker identifies distinct phases in the game of Phoenix Wright which parallel these events, and the link is in the description for that full chapter if you are interested in getting all the details. Problem-based instruction is less technical, revolving around the statement of a problem, hypothesizing solutions or answers, gathering information, engaging in evidence-based argument, and finally, solving the problem. if that isn't a one-to-one description of a game which revolves around solving a murder mystery, I don't know what is. The point is, games themselves almost seem to know what they're doing when they teach a player how to play. I doubt that the guys at Capcom had Gagne's 9 events of instruction bookmarked on their computers when they wrote the story, but being able to compare good game design to scholarly educational theory legitimizes what games might have to say about effective pedagogy. James Paul Gee is an influential author on literacy, language, education, and video game pedagogy, and his work is going to show up a lot in this video. In a 2005 paper titled Learning by Design, Good Video Games as Learning Machines, he tackles the question, how do games get children to learn complex, lengthy, and difficult concepts? Gee breaks down a couple of key factors behind how games are able to do this. One is player agency, or empowered learners, where a player/learner has a sense of agency and control over the activity, and it also needs their active input and engagement. Players generally tend to like it when their choices matter, and it's generally indicative of a well-designed game. Another is a concept Gee calls pleasant frustration, or players being faced with doable challenges. Rather than the difficulty putting them off from trying, the player experiences a rewarding struggle, satisfied when they're able to overcome the challenges presented by the game. This is actually something that comes up a lot in educational spaces when we talk about fixed versus growth mindsets. Many students in schools tend to be averse to challenges, and as a result gain a fixed mindset of being unable to overcome those challenges. This is due in some part to the fact that those challenges are just not rewarding to struggle through. Games have essentially done what educators are still trying to do for their students, getting them to quote-unquote embrace the struggle. Like, okay, it was amazing the first time I beat the original Half-Life from 1998 on hard mode. It took me over a month to do, and I am still proud of myself for it. Do you want to know how I felt after spending a whole night on a difficult piece of physics homework in college? I wanted to walk into the woods and forget English.
Speaking of James Paul Gee, he's the originator of the term affinity spaces, which generally refers to any kind of community centered around learning or building a skill. In a 2009 paper he wrote with Elizabeth Hayes, Public Pedagogy Through Video Games, he brings up some anecdotes about tangible technical skills that some individuals have developed through gaming communities, like a teenage girl gaining mastery of Adobe Photoshop because she wanted to make custom outfits for her Sims.
Indeed, there are many iconic examples of video games being ways to hone tangible skills. One that jumps to mind is an article from Polygon about surgeons in Florida warming up for surgery by playing Super Monkey Ball, the hardest game on Earth.
But I want to talk about the affinity space of gaming and its subcultures itself. That's right, here it comes. I'm about to reference hbomberguy in a video for college.
The video Speedrunning is Awesome and Here's Why by gaming YouTuber and video essayist Harry Brewis talks about the gaming subculture of speedrunners, or people who aim to complete a video game as fast as they possibly can through any means necessary.
It's a great video, you should go check it out.
I'm bringing this video up because of the way the speedrunning community generally functions. For being an activity that has a leaderboard and actual full-blown competitions, the speedrunning community is incredibly collaborative. Runners often share tips, tricks, and strategies, openly share new discoveries, and even stitch together the best segments of their work to make a better speedrun. Better runs are made by players building on the work of other people, seeing further by standing on the shoulders of giants, if you will. This kind of space is amazing for learning, as runs are always compared, reviewed, and scrutinized. It somehow does an even better job being a scientific community than the actual scientific community. However, I'm not going to gloss over the fact that the gaming community as a whole is notorious for being a restrictive and toxic space, and this is certainly true, and video games themselves aren't so perfect either. Remember that trial and error I talked about earlier? Games used to be bad, and I mean bad at teaching themselves. Lots of them didn't even have tutorials for a long time. I played Myst for the first time a couple weeks ago, and never in a million years would I have been able to complete it without looking up a walkthrough, because there's nothing telling you what to do, nor does it indicate that it's the kind of game you need to take notes for. And yes, Myst was released in 1993, but this is not ancient history either. Some games just have bad design in other places. Mirror's Edge, the game prominently featured in Brewis' speedrunning video, was released 15 years after Myst, and it's a nightmare to handle on PC. I knew what I was supposed to be doing, but not how to do it, because it was not communicated to me effectively and the controls were not intuitive. So, not every video game has gotten the hang of the whole teaching thing. Also, that pleasant frustration that Guy talks about can very quickly become unpleasant. This phenomenon is known within the gaming community as a rage quit. But for real, the whole game thing just really isn't for everybody, especially not the challenges that come with some of it. Even with intrinsic motivation, games can still burn you out if you're just not getting it, and that's a problem with school too. But you also can't just put down school when you're frustrated with it without it seriously impacting your life. That's called dropping out. So the solution to that won't be found in video games. Lastly, there are a lot of people who warn against gamifying learning, myself included. By trying to copy games strategy for strategy in teaching, you're basically just doing what edutainment did 20 years ago: mediocre teaching and mediocre gaming. At the end of the day, commercial games are about entertainment, so trying to copy them for education will end up leaving something to be desired. It's not really about trying to make learning fun, but more about making learning meaningful to a student the same way that the learning a player is doing in a game is. So what is there to take away as a teacher or an educator? Gaming's biggest strength is intrinsic motivation. We don't learn how to solve puzzles in Legend of Zelda, fire cinder blocks at zombies in Half-Life 2, exploit physics in Portal, or solve court cases in Phoenix Wright because we have a grade riding on it. We do it because it's inherently rewarding in some way, usually because it's fun. In games, the player is familiarized with the basics, presented a challenge, and then rewarded when it's overcome. The act of meeting that challenge and using what the player knows and has learned so far to overcome it is the key. The player is in charge of their experience, and the problem to solve is clear and doable. Employing these concepts within a traditional teaching environment may not be clear-cut, but the ways that video games engage the player and let them explore the rules, actions, and objectives in a way that gives them agency and direction is a good starting point.
Games and teaching both still have a long way to go, and both are going to have their limitations. It's also important to know, too, that games aren't going to be the panacea for our educational system. As Begonia Groh says in her 2007 research review, Digital Games in Education, the Design of Games-Based Learning Environments. That being said, there's a lot educators can learn from video games. The act of learning itself can be rewarding if we know how to do it right, and video games have some pretty good notes on how to do it.